Yo, what is up guys? Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. If I asked you, what was the biggest problem in boxing? What was boxing's number one issue? What would you say? What would you respond with? Aside from things that undermine the sport like corruption, to me the biggest problem in boxing has been apparent for many, many, many years. And finally, I see people start talking about it. But boxing fans being the sheep they are, they're only really talking about it because Eddie Hearn has mentioned it, despite him being, and Dazn being, a massive contributor to this problem. And to me, the biggest problem in boxing is that the vast majority of fighters that you see in 2023 and in the modern era, let's say the last 10 years, just take this little time period, the biggest problem is most fighters are overpaid. They are paid more than they are worth. And for years, for many, many years, I have raised this point. And you get a few detractors, you get some people coming back and trying to refute your point, but they never present any good arguments for it. All they say is, these guys are warriors, they risk their lives, they deserve every penny they get. A lot of people risk their lives in day-to-day life to earn a living. That doesn't value your worth, I'm afraid. And again, the vast majority of fighters in 2023 are overpaid. And it's resulted in a generation of fighters who are inactive, fighting once a year, fighting low levels of competition. Because if you're a champion, let's say you're a WBO super middleweight champion, and you're getting paid $1 million a fight regardless of who it is, regardless of the level of competition, regardless of ticket sales or viewership numbers, you're getting paid $1 million because the network you're fighting on has this cash surplus, investment money, etc. And you're getting paid $1 million a fight. After a few fights, all of a sudden, you become very comfortable. That fire goes. You're content in just picking up $1 million each and every time without really fighting anybody decent. And the reality is, the vast majority of humans like to be comfortable. They don't like to rattle the cage, take a risk, etc. So if you're in that position, you're a champion who's earning $1 million per fight, despite you not really generating it. You're fighting C-level guys each and every time. What would give you the motivation to then fight, let's say, a dangerous up-and-comer, or even another champion who doesn't really have a profile but who's very dangerous, and let's say you'll get paid $1.5 million for that fight? Why would you take that fight knowing you could get beat when you can clean up C-level guys for $1 million each time? That is the reality with so many fighters in this modern era. PBC and Dazn in particular have been very guilty of it. Andrade is an example that comes straight to mind. Demetrius Andrade had numerous fights on Dazn fighting absolute shite. Getting paid good purses, like $1 million for Luke Keeler, for example. Or Jason Quigley, absolute scrubs, let's be honest. And we're sitting here wondering why he then ducked Janibek Alimkhanuly, a dangerous mandatory contender who nobody heard of, because he would have got paid a similar amount to fight Janibek. That wouldn't have been a significant purse increase to take that fight. He was so used to getting good money fighting bums. Why would he fight Janibek, right? Why would he fight Janibek? And, Dazn's introduction into boxing spoilt a lot of fighters. A lot of fighters got overpaid. And to me, it killed the desire of so many fighters. And here now, we finally have Andrade in a good fight against Benavidez, but it's only because it's a pay-per-view. It's only because it's a pay-per-view. He's waited all this time to get a good payday. A better payday than what he's been getting. He hasn't been willing to fight the other contenders, more unknown dangerous guys or anything like that. He's been spoiled. Guys like Leo Santa Cruz under the inception of PBC. When PBC came in, Santa Cruz, fought bum after bum after bum after bum after bum, getting paid good money, like $1 million to fight Jose Cayetano, and people wondered why he wouldn't fight Rigondeaux, a guy with no name value, a guy who was very dangerous, couldn't speak English, and couldn't generate money. So if Leo Santa Cruz fought Rigondeaux, what would he have got paid? Maybe 1.5 million instead of his usual million to fight a bum? Why would he fight Rigondeaux? This overinflation of purses has destroyed a generation of fighters. Keith Thurman, Danny Garcia, Demetrius Andrade, Jamal Charlo, etc. And to get these guys in any meaningful fights, it always has to be a pay-per-view because these guys' purse demands are so extortionate, even though the reality is, the numbers would suggest most of these fights are not pay-per-view worthy fights. Most of these fights are not pay-per-view fights, like Benavidez versus Plant, for example. Those numbers were piss poor. Why is Devin Haney versus Regis Prograis on pay-per-view? Again, is that going to generate numbers? You know the answer, I know the answer. No, of course it isn't. And quite frankly, if they're going to make that fight a pay-per-view, both guys should have a super low guarantee. We're talking like 500 grand. And whatever they sell on top of that, they get on top of their purses. But they know if they accepted that deal, they wouldn't be bringing in that much more. That's a reality. Those guys can't sell shit. But they have to recoup some money, right, Dazn, on that fight. And that's the only way they can get it on because these fighters have been spoiled for far so long. And boxing fans, the mugs they are, keep on paying for it. Showtime Boxing recently announced they're bowing out of boxing. I mean, is it any wonder? Is it any wonder? I mean, when you're a production company or a TV channel, what is your number one priority when it comes to making content? It's cost of production, right? It's cost of production. You look at some of these Showtime shows, like non-pay-per-view cards, pitiful numbers, like low 100,000s, pitiful numbers. Even some of the pay-per-views, very low numbers in the sort of low 200Ks, mid 200Ks, and boxing fans act like these numbers are a success. And that's the thing that frustrates me with these pay-per-view number dorks on boxing Twitter and boxing YouTube. They'll point out to you what numbers each pay-per-view did, what pay-per-view failed, what pay-per-view broke even, what pay-per-view made a profit, etc. They'll point all these out. And they'll say any pay-per-view that made a profit is a success. That's not the case. Anybody who's worked in finance realises cost of capital. So let's say, for argument's sake, Ryan Garcia versus Tank Davis. I'm not sure exactly how many pay-per-view numbers it did, but it was basically, it was described as a box office success, right? So let's say, for argument's sake, it sold 1 million pay-per-view buys at $70 a pop. That's 70 million, okay, they brought in on pay-per-view. But then you have to factor in the cost of production, so paying the fighters. Let's say, for argument's sake, the total cost of production was 60 million. So that leaves you with a 10 million profit. Cost of production would entail paying the fighters, including the undercard, paying for the promotion of a fight, online promotion, physical promotion, radio promotion, TV promotion, etc. Things of that nature. Then you're filming the shoulder programming, so like the All Access, etc. You've got all these expenses coming out. So let's say, for example, that 70 million, it was only a 10 million profit. 10 million profit sounds great, but when you're Showtime, that 60 million was allocated to that boxing event. They're going to be looking at it a lot differently. They're going to be saying, well, could we have put that 60 million to another set of programming that would have generated a lot more money? Maybe some TV series or reality show, whatever it may be. Something that could have been far more lucrative. That is cost of capital. That 60 million was locked away for that time to generate 10 million when maybe the bigwigs at Showtime felt it could have been spent elsewhere to generate more money, more so than just the 10 million profit that pay-per-view made. So when these pay-per-view bods always talk about, oh, this pay-per-view done 50,000 buys over the rate that was the broke-even point, that's a failure to most broadcasters. I'm telling you now, that's a failure. And quite frankly, given how we've seen HBO bow out of boxing, we've seen Showtime bow out of boxing, Fox bow out of boxing, we're seeing all of these networks turn their back on the sports. I believe the end is nigh for this current financial model in the sport of boxing, because it clearly isn't sustainable, especially in America. It clearly isn't, when two of the premier boxing networks have turned their back on the sport in the last 5-6 years. It clearly isn't sustainable. And how many networks have turned their back on PBC now? Fox, Showtime, Spike, Bounce. Were they on NBC for a little while? I think they was on ESPN for a little while. All of these networks turned their back on PBC. It says it all. I know there's a lot of cope going around, there's all of this nonsense going about, but ultimately the PBC, followed by the introduction of Dazn, ruined American boxing. I see asinine takes that Mayweather ruined American boxing and things like that. This investor money from third parties has ruined boxing. We're talking about like Len Blavatnik and Dazn. To get started up, they overpaid fighters to join. Drastically overpaid fighters. Same with PBC, with the Rutherland Reed money, hundreds of millions of dollars spent on absolute shite. Absolute mismatches. Silly purses, and you wonder why these fighters have no ambition. You wonder why these fighters fight once a year. Sorry. These guys have been spoilt, they've been paid far too much, and quite frankly, it's killed a generation of fighters in American boxing. Time has come for a change. I think boxing needs a financial reset. What that entails, I don't know, but I don't see the current model being sustainable. This can't keep on going on, can it? I mean, you see all these channels keep on pulling out. We shall see, but ultimately, listen, Showtime apparently had a good year. Well, apparently not. Apparently not. Too little too late, I'm afraid. And here we are, in 2023. One of the premier boxing networks have pulled out of boxing. They've been supporting boxing since, the 80s? Late 70s, 80s? I think Hagler was their first fight. I forget who Hagler fought. Was it Mugabe? I don't know. But they've been in boxing since those days, and they're bowing out. The custodians of boxing, Al Heyman, those behind the PBC, Dazn, Matchroom, Len Blavatnik, etc. These guys have ruined American boxing, as far as I'm concerned. They've ruined American boxing, not Floyd Mayweather. And listen, I've had my issues with Mayweather, particularly since the Money Mayweather era of his career. But ultimately, the mess that American boxing finds itself in is down to the custodians of the sports. We're talking promoters, networks, etc. And here we are, in 2023. I'm sure PBC are going to get another deal, maybe with Amazon. That's for speculation right now, but I mean, I expect them to get a deal, but even when they do, are they going to make a success of it? Are they going to grow the sport, make the sport more accessible, make their fighters more well-known, make their fighters more active, give us better fights? Are they going to achieve any of those statements? History will tell you no. But, we still get these same promoter fanboys shilling for these different networks, these different promotional outfits. And it's ring around the rosies. I told you years ago, these guys are overpaid. I told you years ago. And now you hear Eddie Hearn saying it. Now his dork little fans are going to say, oh yeah, he's right. I was telling you this years ago. And he was one of the biggest culprits of it. He's contributed to this mess. And now, Eddie's speaking facts. Some of us have been saying this for years. UFC has a far superior model. Oh, UFC fighters don't get paid what they're worth. Yes, they do. That's the issue. They get paid what they're worth. There's low guarantees on all of the pay-per-views, and if they succeed, they're going to get money on the back end. Look at Conor McGregor. You think that guy weren't cheesing off the UFC? Of course he was. He was worth tens of millions before Mayweather, before Proper 12. He was getting paid silly money on the back end because he was selling fights, selling numbers. That's how it should work. But, you know, boxing fans like to point out at UFC and say, oh, boxers get paid more, la-di-da-di-da. That's the issue. These guys are not worth what they're fucking paid. That's the issue. And that's why UFC is delivering a far better product, a far more consistent product than any promoter in boxing. And it isn't close. Quite frankly, it isn't close. And there you go. They actually run like a real business. You know? They're not reliant on third-party investor money or this, that and the other. You know, they're doing it properly. They're doing it properly. And you see the product that's being delivered. It's night and day compared to boxing. Where we go from here is interesting. As I said, I don't think the current model is sustainable. I think the bubble has to burst at some points. And I am crossing my fingers, crossing my toes that it bursts sooner rather than later, and the sport has some sort of reset, a financial reset. Because most in this sport have been taking. I know it's not popular to say that about fighters, because, oh, they risk their lives, but it's the truth. A lot of these guys have cheesed off boxing for far too long, when they ain't worth shit. That's a reality. You got to fight for your worth. These guys don't do that. They're giving it. Yeah, share your thoughts below. Beanie Guy Del Boy. Peace.